She doesn't belong here. That's what Dr. Pierce had whispered to the pharmaceutical representative 3 days ago, his voice pitched low enough that Katie Morrison heard it anyway. The rep laughed nervously. Dr. Pierce straightened his white coat, Italian linen, probably cost more than Katie's monthly rent, and didn't look back as he walked past her station. She was changing and 4 bag at the time. She didn't flinch. She didn't even pause. She just kept working. They didn't know what she'd done before Cedar Creek Medical. They didn't know that the woman in the rumpled scrubs with the faded unit patch sewn into her locker had once commanded a surgical team under mortar fire outside Tikrit. Her classified file sat in a Pentagon database, flagged and sealed, while she monitored medication counts and emptied bedpans in San Antonio. 8 months into her assignment. 8 months of being invisible. The way it needed to be. Cedar Creek's fluorescent hallways hummed with the particular electric frequency of afternoon shift change. The antiseptic smell, harsh, chemical, almost sterile enough to be painful, had long since stopped bothering her. Katie moved through the corridors with practiced invisibility, her shoes making almost no sound on the linoleum. The kind of quiet that came from training. From years of moving through spaces where sound meant death. She checked her reflection in a medication cart's polished surface as she passed. Still invisible. Still just another nurse in blue scrubs, name tag slightly crooked, hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Good. Room 347 had been waiting for her all morning. The admission papers said Marcus Webb, 61, admitted with acute pancreatitis, deaf since an IED explosion in 2009. Katie's eyes caught on that detail the moment she'd pulled the chart. Tikrit. 2009, that was the year everything changed. That was the year her son's unit came back missing 3 people. That was the year she'd started this job, this cover, this life built on compartments and silence. She knocked on the door frame instead of entering. Protocol. Respect. The man in the bed looked up from the window he'd been staring through. Marcus Webb had the kind of face that looked like it had been assembled from experiences that couldn't be undone. Weathered. Scarred at the left temple where the shrapnel had caught him. His left shoulder carried the tension of someone who'd learned to compensate for hearing that would never return. His eyes, his eyes were sharp. Military sharp. The kind of eyes that had seen people depend on them for survival. Katie smiled. She didn't say anything. She simply raised her hands and began to sign. Her fingers moved with unexpected fluency, each gesture precise and unhurried. Hello. I'm Katie. I'm your nurse today. It was ASL she'd learned in a specialized combat medic training course 8 years ago, in a room classified so far above top secret that even the Pentagon had 2 versions of the files. One real, one fabricated. This was the real one. Webb's entire body changed. His shoulders dropped. The tension in his jaw released. His hands came up, and he signed back, "You sign." Hands that had commanded. Hands that had learned a new language when the old one left him. Katie nodded. Years of experience. She'd worked with deaf patients before. She understood the difference between understanding and being understood. Between accommodation and genuine respect. This was respect. His daughter had called the hospital this morning. Asked specifically if anyone on staff could communicate with him. The intake nurse had checked the roster, nobody listed ASL as a skill. But Katie had been in the break room at 7:08 a.m. when she overheard the question. She'd simply walked over to the scheduling desk and offered. No explanation. No resume of qualifications. Just, "I can help with that." She pulled up a chair, the one in the corner that squeaked when you dragged it across tile, and sat beside his bed. The morning light came through the window at an angle that made the linoleum shine. In the distance, down the hallway, she could hear the code blue announcements, the paging system crackling with names and locations, the machinery of a hospital doing what hospitals do. But in this room, there was only quiet. The kind of quiet that Webb had lived in for 14 years. Katie existed in several kinds of quiet. This one felt like recognition. How long have you been deaf? She signed. It was a direct question. She'd learned that people like Webb didn't appreciate circumspection. Since Tikrit, he signed back. 2009. Katie's hands moved. I know that war. She paused. That pause was important. It created space for the next thing. My son's unit was there. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Dark Horse Company. Webb's hand stopped. His eyes widened slightly. He signed. What was his name? Thomas Morrison. Katie signed. 2nd Lieutenant Thomas Morrison. She didn't mention that he'd come back missing his left arm below the elbow. That he'd come back with nightmares that started at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night. That he'd come back alive because Marcus Webb had been his commanding officer, and commanding officers were the kind of men who kept their people breathing. Webb's hands trembled slightly as he brought them up to sign. Good officer. Good men under him. I remember him. Steady hands. That's what we needed. Steady hands. Katie nodded. She understood what he meant. Steady hands meant you could trust that person with the fragile architecture of staying alive. Steady hands meant you didn't question when they moved, because questioning cost seconds, and seconds cost lives. The door to room 347 opened without knocking. Dr. Pierce entered, his white coat trailing behind him like a cape he believed he deserved. He didn't look at Webb. He barely acknowledged Katie. He simply approached the vital signs monitor, his expensive shoes, Italian leather, definitely Italian leather, clicking against the linoleum with each step. His presence changed the room's air pressure. Literally. Figuratively. Both. He pulled up the chart on the bedside computer. His fingers drummed against the desk once. Twice. The motion of a man used to people jumping when he made any sound at all. Dr. Pierce, Katie said quietly. I have a question about the current medication protocol. He turned slowly. His eyes moved down to her, taking in the scrubs, the name tag, the insignificance. She could watch the calculation happen behind his pupils. Just another nurse. The kind that needed to be reminded of her place in the hierarchy. The pancreatic enzyme levels suggest we should adjust the morphine dosage, Katie continued. The 4 milligrams every 4 hours might be too aggressive given his current liver function. I was thinking 2.5 milligrams instead. For a moment, Dr. Pierce simply stared at her. It was the kind of stare that was meant to burn things away. Then he turned to the pharmaceutical representative who had just stepped into the doorway, the same rep from 3 days ago, the one who'd heard him say those words, the one who'd laughed, and he spread his hands in a gesture of exasperation. This is what I'm talking about, he said. This is the problem right here. People with half a qualification trying to practice medicine. She's read some internet article and now she thinks she's a pharmacologist. He turned back to Katie. The dosage is correct. It's current protocol. We follow evidence-based practice here, not whatever you read on your lunch break. Katie didn't respond. She simply nodded and turned back to Webb, who had been watching this entire exchange with the careful attention of someone trained to read body language instead of words. She signed to him, keeping her hands in the space between them, your pain level. Where is it on a scale of 1 to 10? Webb signed back, 6. Maybe 7. The medication helps. Katie acknowledged this. She didn't look at Dr. Pierce again. She simply adjusted the 4 stand, checked the line, verified the tape was secure. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd performed this task under circumstances considerably worse than afternoon hospital shift. Under circumstances where mistakes meant body bags instead of insurance forms. The pharmaceutical rep had disappeared. Dr. Pierce remained for exactly 4 more seconds. Katie counted, the way she always counted, the way you learned to count when seconds were currency, before his shoes clicked back out into the hallway. The door closed with a soft pneumatic hiss. Webb's hands came up again. He signed, you're not just a nurse, are you? Katie looked at him. Really looked at him. The kind of look that bypassed the surface of things and went directly to what was underneath. 8 months of invisibility suddenly felt very thin. She signed carefully, "I'm exactly what this hospital needs." But that wasn't entirely true, and they both knew it. What she was, what she'd always been, was a woman with steadier hands than most people would ever understand. A woman who'd learned to live in the spaces between identities. A woman who could sign in American Sign Language with the fluency of someone trained by the military's best, and who could also perform emergency field surgery under mortar fire, and who was currently employed as a civilian nurse monitoring medication counts at a hospital in San Antonio while a classified Pentagon investigation ran on a parallel track that nobody here even knew existed. Marcus Webb was the first person in 8 months who'd looked at her directly and recognized that something in her equations didn't add up. He was also her son's commanding officer. The man who'd kept her son breathing when the world was trying to take him apart. Webb signed, "Thank you. For the sign language. For remembering my men." Katie signed back, "Always remember." She stood, and the chair squeaked again as she pushed it back into its corner. The 4 was secure. The vital signs were stable. The medication was running at the rate that Dr. Pierce had prescribed, even though Katie's calculations had been correct, and even though the wrong dosage would likely cause problems by evening shift. But evening shift would belong to someone else. For now, she was invisible again, and invisibility was where the real work happened. As she turned toward the door, Webb signed one more thing, "Your son." "He came back?" Katie paused. Her hands moved, "Yes. He came back." Webb signed, "That's good. I'm glad. Steady hands like that, they deserve to come home." Katie left room 347. The hallway buzzed with its usual afternoon chaos, nurses calling out, machines beeping their mechanical heartbeat, the overhead paging system announcing that Dr. Kowalski was needed in the emergency department. She moved through it all with the same practiced invisibility she'd maintained for 8 months. At her medication station, she pulled up the chart for Marcus Webb and verified that the dosage would need adjustment within the next 6 hours. She made a note. Professional. Documented. The kind of evidence that would be useful later if anyone ever asked questions about her knowledge or her authority or the strange precision of her medical decisions. But that wasn't the worst part. Not yet. The worst part was still coming, waiting somewhere in the future with the patience of something inevitable. The worst part was a man named Dr. Pierce who believed that competence was something that needed to be punished when it came from the wrong kind of person. The worst part was a man named Dr. Pierce who believed that competence was something that needed to be punished when it came from the wrong kind of person. He spent the morning before the shift change in the break room, coffee in one hand and Katie's personnel file in the other, his voice carrying just far enough to reach the clustering nurses around the supply cart. "Her credentials don't match the Texas registry," he said, not looking up from the folder. "I checked twice. Something's off." Jennifer Martinez, 7 years at Cedar Creek, exchanged a glance with Malik Washington. Neither spoke. In hospital culture, silence was permission. "She's not who she claims to be," Pierce continued, his tone casual as if discussing the weather rather than dismantling someone's professional identity. "I'm filing a formal inquiry with licensing. You should all be careful what information you share with her." Katie walked past the break room doorway at that exact moment, her hands carrying a fresh unit census printout, her pace unchanged. She'd heard every word. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song above her head, indifferent to the poison spreading through the air like invisible gas. By afternoon, the unit culture had shifted. Nurses who'd nodded hello now looked past her. Dr. Pierce orchestrated it the way a conductor leads an orchestra, not through volume, but through precision. He'd spent 8 months building his authority at Cedar Creek, and he wielded it like a scalpel. The real confrontation came at 3:13 p.m. during afternoon rounds. Webb's room sat at the end of the east corridor, afternoon light slanting through the window at an angle that caught the dust particles floating like tiny soldiers in formation. His daughter Sarah sat in the visitor's chair, her hand resting on her father's shoulder. Webb had deteriorated since his admission, the stroke had left his right side weak, his speech compromised, but his mind sharp as a combat rifle. Katie had been using ASL to communicate with him for 6 days, each conversation flowing like water, natural and unforced, the way his daughter's eyes would soften when she watched them talk. Dr. Pierce entered without knocking. He stood in the doorway with his white coat crisp as fresh paper, stethoscope draped like a scarf around his neck, his presence instantly changing the room's pressure. Katie felt it, that particular weight that certain men carried, the kind that came from knowing everyone had to listen whether they wanted to or not. "Miss Morrison," he said, his voice coating her name like oil on glass. "Your little sign language performance might impress patients, but this isn't a community theater." Katie maintained her position at Webb's bedside. She didn't turn to face him. She finished documenting the blood pressure reading on the electronic chart, 132/78, stable, before responding. "Mr. Webb deserves communication," she said quietly. "Not isolation. Dignity isn't optional care," she added, and her voice carried the weight of someone who'd held more than just patients' hands. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. She looked at her father, whose jaw had tightened, whose hands had curled into fists against the white hospital blankets. Pierce stepped into the room fully now, his shoes clicking against the tile with each measured stride. He positioned himself between Katie and Webb, physically inserting his authority into the space. "Your methods are exactly why we have protocols," he said. "Standards exist for a reason. They protect patients. They protect liability. They protect the integrity of this institution." One measured breath. Katie's chest rose and fell with the practiced control of someone who'd learned breathing as a survival mechanism in environments where panic meant death. A single tear escaped her left eye, not from sadness, but from the pressure of holding everything back. She didn't break eye contact. She didn't look away. She simply wiped it with the back of her hand, and when she did, her gaze remained locked on Pierce's. "Sir," she said, her voice dropping to the register of someone speaking from hard experience, "my methods kept men breathing when protocol would have left them in body bags." Pierce's jaw tightened visibly. His mouth opened, then closed. For 3 seconds, an eternity in hospital time, nobody moved. Webb's heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The ventilation system whispered through the ceiling vents. Sarah's hand gripped her father's shoulder tighter. Then Pierce turned and left without another word. But the retreat wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something worse. The next morning, Katie arrived at 6:45 a.m. to find a formal write-up posted on the unit bulletin board, next to the staff schedule and the infection control protocols. The paper was laminated, pristine, official. The words were calculated. Incident report, Ms. Katie Morrison, RN. Date, yesterday. Citation, unprofessional communication methods deviating from standard care protocols. Regulation 2.4.7, Joint Commission Standards. Patient communication must follow established hierarchical medical authority structures. Non-approved communication protocols create liability exposure and undermine physician authority. Recommendation, performance improvement plan mandatory. All patient interaction subject to observation. Her name was spelled correctly. The dates were accurate. The violation was entirely fabricated. 12 nurses gathered in the unit that morning. Katie watched them read the memo, watched their eyes slide away from her face like water sliding off glass. Malik stepped back from the supply cart when she approached. Jennifer suddenly became very interested in a patient's medication list. The message didn't need to be spoken aloud. The bulletin board had done the work. At lunch, Katie carried her tray to the break room table where she'd been sitting alone for the past 3 days anyway. She'd brought the same thing she always did: turkey sandwich, apple, water bottle, the fuel of someone who didn't have the luxury of enjoying food. She opened the sandwich wrapper and was halfway through the first bite when Jennifer grabbed her Tupperware container from the refrigerator and stood. The chair scraped against the linoleum. Malik grabbed his salad and followed. Then markers from day shift. Then the respiratory therapist whose name Katie could never quite remember. The exodus took 17 seconds. When it finished, Katie sat alone under the fluorescent lights that buzzed with the sound of a hive in distress. The hum filled the space where human voices should have been. Dr. Pierce appeared in the doorway at 12:34 p.m. He leaned against the frame with his arms crossed, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. His presence had the quality of a predator that has tasted blood and found it good. "Having trouble making friends, Florence," he said, his smile precise and sharp. "Perhaps because your colleagues recognize someone playing dress-up." Katie set her sandwich down on the paper plate. She didn't look up at him. She simply wiped her mouth with a napkin and met his eyes with the flat regard of someone who'd learned long ago that showing reaction was a weakness to be exploited. "I work," she said. "That's all I need to do." "You work," Pierce repeated, as if the word itself was amusing. "Yes. Though that remains to be determined." He left the break room, but not before extracting a piece of paper from his jacket pocket and setting it on the table beside her tray. When Katie looked down, she saw it was another memo, this one to administration, dated that morning. The subject line read, "Credential verification request, potential falsification of background information." The next 3 weeks became a masterclass in institutional sabotage. Dr. Pierce built his case the way an architect builds a fortress, methodically, with attention to detail, with each element reinforcing the others. He filed a formal complaint citing Joint Commission Regulation 2.4.7 regarding non-approved communication protocols. He documented her excessive time spent with non-critical patients. He emailed hospital administration with subject lines like resistance to hierarchical medical authority structures and patient safety concerns related to unorthodox care methods. Each form was stamped with official letterhead. Each memo was printed on hospital paper. Each complaint was technically untrue in ways that were nearly impossible to disprove. He was building a paper fortress that would collapse on her the moment he chose to push. But that wasn't the worst part. Katie's real assignment, the classified investigation she couldn't tell anyone about, the Pentagon task force operation hidden beneath her nurse's uniform, was disintegrating. She was supposed to be tracking opioid diversion patterns in the pharmacy, monitoring prescription logs, identifying the source of controlled substance disappearances that had been plaguing Cedar Creek for 18 months. Her contact at JSOC had greenlit her placement specifically because of her medical credentials and her ability to work in controlled environments. Then Marcus Webb had arrived on her unit. Webb wasn't just a patient. Webb was Derek's commanding officer. Derek was Katie's son. And Webb was the man who'd pulled Derek out of a burning Humvee outside Tikrit when an IED took out their convoy's lead vehicle. Webb was the reason Katie's son had come home with his legs intact instead of arriving in a flag-draped box. The mission and the man had collided. She couldn't investigate pharmacy records without appearing suspicious now. Couldn't request access to medication storage areas without Pierce documenting it. Couldn't move freely through the hospital without his shadow following, his presence like a weight pressing down on her shoulders, restricting her movements, limiting her shifts to those when he was present, scheduling observation periods for performance improvement that were really just surveillance. During a late shift on day 19, Katie watched Dr. Pierce walk into the medication room at 10:53 p.m. She was updating a chart at the nurse's station, her peripheral vision caught the movement, the casual confidence of someone who believed himself unwatched. Through the medication room window, she saw him pocket 2 morphine vials from the secure cabinet, the exact vials she'd been tracking as part of the opioid diversion pattern. She reached for her phone, muscle memory pulling up the camera function, but the screen flickered and went dark. Battery dead. Or something else. She never found out which. That night, alone in her apartment at 2:17 a.m., Katie sat at her kitchen table with her classified phone, the one that couldn't be traced, the one that connected directly to a Pentagon liaison officer whose name she'd been given only once, and she typed 5 words, mission compromised. Timeline accelerating. Request directive. The response came at 2:42 a.m., 2 weeks. Extract protocol Raven standing by. Raven. Her call sign from the 75th Ranger Regiment. The identity she'd buried when she'd taken the civilian name Katie Morrison. 2 weeks before they pulled her out, before the mission was shut down, before 8 months of work collapsed into classified failure. During afternoon rounds the next day, Webb signed to her while she took his vitals. His hands moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd learned sign language the way soldiers learn hand signals, with absolute clarity and no wasted movement. "You remind me of someone," he signed, his eyes locked on hers. "A soldier. Brave." Katie's hands trembled as she completed the blood pressure reading. 90 beats per minute. That was her heart rate. That was the cost of being recognized. "Just doing my job," she signed back, but the words felt hollow, because the job she was supposed to do was collapsing while the job she actually needed to do, protecting this man, protecting her son's former commander, was the one that might cost her everything. The clock was running. Dr. Pierce had no idea what he was destroying. And Katie had 14 days to decide if she was a nurse first or a soldier. Dr. Pierce had been building his fortress for 3 weeks. Every complaint filed in triplicate. Every regulation citation perfectly weaponized. Every memo timestamped and copied to administrators he'd cultivated over 22 years at Cedar Creek Medical. Katie watched him work without appearing to watch him. She'd learned that skill in Tikrit, the art of surveillance without surveillance. Noticing everything. Showing nothing. The documentation trail he was constructing was meticulous. On Monday of the 3rd week, a formal write-up appeared in Katie's personnel file citing failure to follow established communication protocols with deaf patients. The regulation he cited didn't exist. Katie knew this because she'd reviewed the entire Joint Commission manual at 2 in the morning, sitting in her apartment with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 6 hours prior. The next day, another memo, pattern of independent clinical judgment outside scope of nursing practice. Then another, insubordination toward attending physician. Pierce was layering them like geological strata, each complaint building on the last, creating the illusion of accumulated evidence rather than manufactured crisis. The staff felt it. Nurses who'd nodded to Katie in the break room now stared at their phones when she entered. The orthopedic wing nurse manager, Sandra, actually pulled her aside on a Thursday afternoon near the supply closet where the expired-for bags were stored. "I'm telling you this as a friend," Sandra whispered, glancing both directions down the corridor. "Pierce is building something. I've seen him do this before. 3 years ago with Dr. Patel. Just be careful." Katie thanked her with a single nod. The voice she used was the old voice. The careful one. "I appreciate that, Sandra." 2 seconds later, Sandra was gone, and Katie was alone again with the smell of antiseptic and the weight of a secret she couldn't share. Friday afternoon changed everything. Katie was reviewing the charts from her assigned patients on the surgical floor, routine post-op monitoring, discharge paperwork, the work that looked competent and invisible. Then she saw Marcus Webb's name in the system. She shouldn't have been able to access his file from the orthopedic wing, but she did anyway because protocols were one thing and vigilance was another. His cardiac enzyme levels were climbing. Troponin I at 0.18, escalating from 0.12 yesterday. His ejection fraction showed subtle changes on the echo report from Wednesday. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would scream from the pages. But to someone who'd held a soldier's chest open in a sandstorm and felt the heart restart under her hands, to someone who understood the language of dying tissue, the message was clear. Marcus Webb was developing cardiac instability. She filled out the cardiology consult request at 3:24 p.m. The form was precise, professional, documented. Chief complaint, elevated cardiac enzymes with subtle ejection fraction changes. Recommend cardiology evaluation for rule out acute coronary syndrome. She even noted the family's reported complaints about chest discomfort. The consult was rejected within 40 minutes. Not reviewed. Not deferred. Rejected. The message was attached to Dr. Pierce's name like a signature: patient is stable. No cardiac intervention warranted at this time. Nursing should focus on assigned patients, not diagnostic speculation. Katie's hands didn't shake. Her jaw didn't clench. She read the message 3 times, then walked to Dr. Pierce's office with the patience of someone who'd learned how to move through hostile territory without detection. He was typing when she knocked. She waited the 3 seconds it took for him to look up, then she didn't wait for permission to speak. The words came out like ice. Marcus Webb's cardiac enzymes are climbing. His echo shows ejection fraction changes. He needs cardiology. Pierce's face did something that might have been amusement or contempt or the mixture of both that only men like him could achieve. "You're a nurse, Captain." He said her rank like it was a diagnosis. Like it was a disease he'd discovered and named. Not a diagnostician. "Stop playing doctor. You're reassigned to orthopedics for the weekend. Full weekend. That floor needs you more than Webb needs your unsolicited medical opinions." He returned to his computer as if she'd already left. The dismissal was absolute. Katie turned around and walked out of his office with the same composure she'd worn when IEDs exploded 70 meters from her Humvee. But something in her chest had shifted. Something fundamental. The Pentagon investigation she was running was about to collide with the Hippocratic oath she'd sworn. The weekend started at 7 p.m. on Friday. Katie was assigned to the orthopedic wing, 3 floors away from Marcus Webb. She could see his room from the hallway windows if she stood at the exact right angle near the stairwell, but she couldn't access his charts from the orthopedic workstations, couldn't review his vitals, couldn't do anything but watch from distance like a sentinel who'd been relieved of duty. At 8 p.m., Webb's daughter Sarah called the main hospital line asking if her father was all right. His chest hurt, she said. He was uncomfortable. The weekend physician, a doctor named Hendricks who took all his clinical cues from whatever Dr. Pierce had written in the chart, listened politely and assured her that Webb was being monitored closely. Family members often overestimate symptom severity, Hendricks said according to the nurse who logged the call. He's stable. Rest assured. Katie was restocking the orthopedic supply room at 8:43 p.m. when she overheard the conversation between 2 nurses about Sarah's call. She felt something like controlled rage settle into her bloodstream, not the rage that burned, but the rage that focused. The kind that came from understanding that protocols and paperwork existed for reasons, and that ignoring them meant people died. She found a computer station that still had access to the hospital's remote monitoring system for emergency purposes, and she checked Webb's telemetry from the orthopedic floor. His heart rate was elevated. His ST segments were normal on the EKG, which was good, but that baseline troponin was still climbing like a slow-motion avalanche gathering mass. At 2 a.m. Sunday, Katie's pager buzzed with an alert that made her breath go shallow. Webb's telemetry was showing dangerous arrhythmias. PVCs firing in rapid succession. The rhythm was deteriorating, and no one on night shift was going to read it closely enough to see it. No one except her. Katie abandoned her assigned floor, moving through the corridors of Cedar Creek Medical with the fluidity of someone who'd navigated hostile territory at 0400 hours. Her shoes made almost no sound on the tile. Her ID badge stayed forward. She looked like she belonged, and belonging was half of survival. The monitor alarm screamed before she even reached Webb's room. A high-pitched cry that echoed down the darkened hallway like something wounded. Katie broke into a run, only 30 meters now, maybe less, her hand already reaching for the doorframe. She could see the telemetry display from the corridor entrance. His heart rate was 142. His rhythm was a mess of electrical noise and dangerous beats stacked like cards about to collapse. She burst through the door ready to intervene, ready to call a code, ready to do whatever it took. Dr. Pierce stood in the doorway like a checkpoint guardian. He was wearing hospital attire, scrubs, white coat, the armor of authority, but his presence made the air pressure change. His eyes were ice. "You're not assigned here." His voice was the voice of someone who'd learned that power was most effective when delivered quietly. "Leave. Now. Or I'm filing for immediate suspension pending investigation." Behind him, Webb's monitor screamed. The alarm was reaching a crescendo. Katie could feel the seconds collapsing like a structure about to fail. She could see the rhythm deteriorating on the monitor screen, the dangerous electrical storm building in Webb's cardiac tissue. And she could feel the choice crystallizing in her body like concrete hardening around steel reinforcement. The mission, the Pentagon investigation into opioid diversion that had brought her to Cedar Creek Medical undercover, the classified work that had consumed 8 months of her life and was supposed to have 10 more weeks, that mission would be over if she went around Pierce. If she acted on medical knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess. If she revealed herself, the cover would collapse. Weeks of investigation would scatter like smoke. The intelligence she'd been building would become useless. But Marcus Webb's heart was failing. And he was still just a patient in need, still just a man who'd commanded her son's unit, still just someone whose daughter had called 3 times asking for help that nobody had thought to give. "Step aside, doctor." Katie's voice had changed. It came from deeper in her chest now, and it carried with it the weight of 1,000 commands issued under fire. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. It was the sound of someone who'd stopped asking permission. The Friday evening shift at Cedar Creek Medical moved like molasses through a kitchen drain. 7 o'clock, the change of shift report beginning in the conference room, and Katie Morrison stood at the nursing station reviewing Marcus Webb's chart one more time. His troponin levels had climbed. Not dramatically. Not yet. But the pattern was there: 0.04, 0.06, 0.09, a staircase leading somewhere she'd learned to recognize in sandstorms and field hospitals where the next hour determined who went home and who went into a flag-folded box. She'd flagged it 3 times. Dr. Pierce had rejected the cardiology consult twice more. The monitor above Webb's bed hummed its steady mechanical pulse, green waves rolling across the screen like a metronome counting down to something none of the incoming staff could see. Katie traced her finger down the lab results: BNP elevated, lactate creeping up, potassium at 5.7 and drifting toward the danger zone. Every number was a whispered warning. Every warning was something Pierce had chosen to ignore. She closed the chart and walked toward his room, her feet silent on the tile. 12 years of training had erased the sound of her own footsteps. Marcus Webb was sleeping, his daughter Sarah reading in the corner chair with a book she wasn't actually absorbing. The ventilator beside his bed wheezed its mechanical rhythm, each breath delivered with the precision of a metronome. His chest rose and fell. Steady. For now. Katie checked the 4 lines, verified the medication drips, confirmed the heart monitor leads were secure. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked like it was about to shatter. She'd learned that lesson at 24 years old in a forward operating base outside Fallujah, where perfectly stable patients had gone bad in the time it took to step out of the room. She'd been a medic then, rank of specialist, attached to 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and she'd watched a Lance Corporal's blood pressure tank because nobody had checked the infiltration site on his central line. By the time they realized the 4 had blown through the vessel wall and was dumping fluids into his chest cavity, they were doing a needle decompression in a medical tent lit by chemical glow sticks and prayers. Webb's numbers were screaming the same language. The shift change had begun in earnest. Day nurses peeling off their jackets, night nurses arriving with their coffee thermoses and resignation. The hallway filled with that peculiar collision of exhaustion leaving and alertness arriving. In 10 minutes, the day-charged nurse would finish her report. In 12 minutes, the night team would officially own the unit. In 14 minutes, nobody would be paying attention to anything except their own patient assignments. Katie set Webb's chart back in the holder outside his room and turned toward the nursing station. She needed to flag this one more time with whoever took the night shift. Not Pierce. Never Pierce. But someone. Someone who would listen. That was when she heard it, not a sound, but the absence of one. The heart monitor stopped beeping. Katie moved before the thought fully formed. The sprint back to Webb's room lasted 3 seconds and felt like 30 years. Sarah screamed. The book fell to the floor, pages fluttering like a bird with a broken wing. Marcus Webb's body was already seizing, his back arching off the bed as his electrical system went haywire, neurons firing in chaos, his heart no longer beating but vibrating, ventricular fibrillation, the rhythm of death wearing a mask. "Code Blue!" Katie shouted, and her voice carried that particular timbre that made people listen. 12 years of military medical authority wrapped in 2 words. Code Blue, bed 412. Get the crash cart now. She was already pressing the button on the bed rail, the one that opened the chest. Fingers on his carotid, nothing. No pulse. Dead pulse. She positioned herself at his right side and locked her hands, beginning compressions with the mechanical rhythm she could do in her sleep. Compression, compression, compression. 30 times. The sternum beneath her palms was like working a hydraulic pump, pushing blood that had stopped moving, forcing oxygen into lungs that weren't breathing. 1001. 1002. 1003. The code team thundered through the door. 2 nurses, a respiratory therapist, and behind them, dragging the crash cart like it weighed nothing, came Rodriguez from the ER. She was fast. She was competent. She didn't ask questions. How long? Rodriguez was already ripping open the defibrillator pads. 30 seconds. No warning. Rhythm. Katie didn't break cadence. The monitor showed the truth, VFib, that chaotic scribble of a heart that had forgotten how to work. The defibrillator beeped, indicating it was charging. Pads on the chest. Rodriguez's hands moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this 40 times this month. Everyone clear. Katie stepped back. Rodriguez hit the button. Webb's body convulsed, lifted off the bed like an electric shock had run through him. For a second, one perfect second, everyone in the room held their breath. The monitor showed flat line. Still nothing. Resume compressions, Rodriguez said, and Katie was back, her hands locked, her body moving in that mechanical rhythm that belonged to neither the living nor the dead. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. The respiratory therapist squeezed the bag, pushing oxygen into Webb's lungs while his heart refused to cooperate. Charge to 200, Rodriguez said. The defibrillator beeped. Pads came off. Rodriguez slammed them back onto his chest. Clear. Nothing. The 3rd shock didn't work either. By the 4th, Katie's arms were burning, but she didn't slow. Muscle memory was taking over now, the same way it had in that forward operating base in Tikrit, the same way it had the night the IED took out the convoy and she was the only one standing who knew how to stop the bleeding. Epinephrine, Rodriguez said. Someone pushed 1 milligram 4. Someone else was starting a second line. Sarah was sobbing in the corner, her hands covering her mouth, and Katie felt the weight of that sound like a physical thing pressing on her chest. The monitor still showed flat line. Let me see the cart, Katie said, her voice cutting through the organized chaos like a knife. Rodriguez glanced at her. She didn't question it. She stepped aside. Katie reached for the defibrillator pads, and her hand stopped. The charge indicator was dead. The battery was dead. The entire system was showing 0 power, which meant nobody had charged it after the last code, which meant it had been sitting here for hours, maybe longer, waiting to be needed and completely useless when the moment came. She looked at the maintenance log tape to the side of the cart. Saturday, marked for inspection. Today was Friday. The inspection had been scheduled for yesterday. Dr. Pierce's signature was supposed to be on that line. His signature wasn't there. 30 seconds. That was the window in Katie's head. 30 seconds before brain death became inevitable. 12 seconds had already passed since the defibrillator failed. 18 seconds remained. Webb's daughter was on her feet now, screaming his name. The monitor was still flat line. Rodriguez was looking at Katie, and there was a question in her eyes, what now? And Katie made a decision that would end everything. She dropped the defibrillator and turned to the supply tray. Her hand found the sterile scalpel without hesitation, without asking permission, without acknowledging that what she was about to do would end her career in civilian nursing. She didn't look at Rodriguez. She didn't look at Sarah. She opened Webb's chest with a move that had taken her 2 weeks to master in a classroom and 2 years to perfect in the field, her blade moving through skin and fascia and muscle with the precision of someone who'd done it in sandstorms where the sand got in everything and the light was wrong and the sounds were wrong and men were dying. The blade went between ribs 5 and 6. Left anterolateral thoracotomy. Her fingers were already moving, spreading the ribs, her hand sliding into the chest cavity, finding the pericardium, tearing through it, and then her hand was on his heart, Marcus Webb's heart, the heart of the man who'd commanded her son's unit, the heart that had kept him alive through 2 ambushes and a firefight in Jolon district, and she was performing cardiac massage from the inside, her palm against the cardiac muscle, squeezing, releasing, with the exact rhythm and pressure she'd learned from a Master Chief Petty Officer who taught her that sometimes the only thing between a man and death was someone willing to put their hand inside his chest. 1, 2, 3. The blood was warm. 1, 2, 3. The heart was responding. 1, 2, 3. And then, the most beautiful thing she'd felt in 8 months at Cedar Creek Medical, a single beat. Spontaneous. The muscle contracting on its own, the electrical system rebooting, the body remembering how to live. The monitor showed a rhythm. It was faint, but it was there. Dr. Pierce appeared in the doorway. His face drained of color. His mouth opened but no sound came out. He was staring at Katie's hand inside the veteran's chest, at the blood, at the impossible intervention, at the violation of every protocol the hospital had trained her to follow. He was staring at someone he'd spent 8 months trying to destroy, and in that moment, whatever calculus had been running in his brain completely recalibrated. Katie didn't look at him. She kept her hand steady, kept the massage going, kept Webb's heart beating while Rodriguez confirmed a pulse, while the respiratory therapist adjusted the oxygen, while Sarah stopped screaming and started crying the kind of tears that mean her father was still breathing. "Good output," Rodriguez said quietly. "We've got perfusion." Katie nodded once, still not breaking her focus. "Get him to OR. Now. Cardiothoracic. Tell them he needs definitive repair. This was a last resort." "You got it." Rodriguez was moving, shouting orders, mobilizing the team. The crash cart was being repositioned. Another 4 was running. Everything was moving at the speed of crisis, the speed of people who understood that they were riding the edge of something irreversible. Dr. Pierce had already left the room. Katie kept her hand on Webb's heart until the surgical team arrived. She walked with the stretcher to the operating room doors. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't make eye contact. She simply existed in that space between the civilian nurse who followed protocols and the special forces officer who understood that sometimes the only rule that mattered was keeping the patient alive. At 8:24 p.m., a hospital administrator requested her presence in the front office. By 9:15 p.m., she was being informed of her immediate suspension pending investigation. By 11:43 p.m., she was sitting in her apartment with a box from her locker in front of her, empty except for the items she'd accumulated in this life, a cracked mug that read "World's Best Nurse" in fading gold letters, a dying succulent plant that someone had given her as a joke, and a folded flag wrapped in clear plastic, the flag from Tikrit, the flag they'd given her when Lieutenant James Chen came home in a flag-folded box, the flag she'd kept because it was the only thing the Pentagon couldn't classify. Rain hammered the windows. Her phone buzzed with messages she couldn't answer. By midnight, she was standing at the bus stop 2 blocks from Cedar Creek Medical, watching the city lights blur through the November cold, understanding that Marcus Webb was alive because she'd been willing to end her career, and her career had been a cover, and the cover was blown, and the mission was compromised, and somewhere in the Pentagon, alarms were going off. But Webb was alive. That was what mattered. That was also what was about to change everything. Dr. Pierce's face went white the moment Webb's heart rhythm stabilized on the monitor. Sinus rhythm. Strong and steady. The defibrillator that wasn't supposed to work had just cost him everything, though he didn't know it yet. Katie was still compressed against the crash cart, her hand shaking not from fear but from the adrenaline of muscle memory, from the weight of what she'd just revealed without meaning to. A field thoracotomy took training. Combat training. The kind civilians didn't have. By 3:16 p.m., Dr. Pierce was in the hospital administrator's office on the 6th floor, his voice climbing with each sentence. His power source had always been documentation, years of building paper trails, of invoking Joint Commission regulations that existed specifically to protect men like him. He prepared for this moment. Not this exact moment, but close enough. She violated every protocol in that emergency, he said, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming against the mahogany desk. Direct cardiac massage without proper authorization. A scalpel instead of approved equipment. She's a menace. And she's operating under a nursing license that needs immediate review. The administrator, a woman named Margaret Foster who'd worked in hospitals for 32 years, listened without interrupting. She'd seen ambitious doctors come and go. She'd also seen ambitious doctors destroy their own careers trying to destroy someone else's. But Dr. Pierce had documentation. He had written accounts from the morning shift. He had policy violations listed in triplicate. He had something that looked like evidence, even though it was really just the architecture of a man protecting his pride. I'm recommending immediate suspension pending investigation, he continued. Pending full credentialing review. This goes to the state medical board, possibly the DEA if there's controlled substance involvement. A field procedure that aggressive suggests she's either reckless or hiding something. Either way, she's dangerous. Margaret Foster made a decision that would echo through federal courtrooms 6 months later. She authorized the suspension. Not because Dr. Pierce was right, but because protocol demanded it. Because when someone performs emergency procedures using methods that weren't in the hospital's approved documentation, there had to be an investigation. It was the only responsible choice. It was also the choice that would free Katie to do what she'd been sent to do. Katie received the notification at 4:23 p.m. A formal letter delivered to her locker by Human Resources, a woman named Diane who wouldn't meet her eyes. Suspension effective immediately. No access to the hospital. No contact with patients. Return your badge and credentials. Pending investigation into unsafe medical practices and deviation from established protocols. The letter cited the emergency thoracotomy by name, by exact location, by Katie's exact actions. Someone had documented everything in real time. She stood in the employee locker room, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a sickly white, and made the calculation that broke her cover into pieces. She could fight this. She could explain the procedure. She could argue that in the absence of functional defibrillation equipment, a thoracotomy was the protocol, the only protocol. She could reference DoD combat casualty care guidelines. She could cite 847 lives saved in Tikrit using identical procedures under direct fire, when protocol was the sound of incoming mortars and the only tool available was what you could hold in your hands. But every word she spoke would shatter months of investigation. The Pentagon needed her inside Cedar Creek. The opioid diversion network stretched across 4 hospitals, with Dr. Pierce as the node connecting them. If Katie revealed herself, if she let her military medical background into the record, the investigation collapsed. The network stayed intact. The pills kept flowing. The red tape and bureaucratic machinery that had been grinding forward for 347 days would have to start from zero. She couldn't do it. She couldn't save herself without losing the mission. And that was the kind of calculation Special Forces Captain Katie Morrison had been trained to make at every level of her career. Sacrifice the tactical for the strategic. Accept the loss of the battle to win the war. Katie picked up her personal effects from the locker. A cracked mug that read "World's Best Nurse" in faded letters, the gift from the pediatric unit when she'd first arrived at Cedar Creek. A dying succulent from the unit windowsill, its leaves brown and curling, the soil completely desiccated. She wrapped it gently in paper towels anyway, because no one deserved to die alone. And a folded flag, small enough to fit in her palm, made from the last combat patch worn by Sergeant James Holloway, her teammate, who died in her arms outside Tikrit with his blood on her hands and his last words asking her to tell his sister he was sorry. The rain started at 5:12 p.m., heavy and cold, the kind of November downpour that made the city smell like wet concrete and desperation. Katie stood at the bus stop on Blanco Street, her cardboard box growing damp at the edges, waiting for the 6:15 that might never come. She was suspended, unemployed, exposed. The nurses who'd ignored her in the break room had no idea that their dismissal was actually mercy. She'd always been temporary, always been a ghost moving through their lives wearing a stolen identity. The minutes stretched. 6:18, 6:22. 6:31, the rain hammered the bus shelter's plastic roof like it was trying to break through, like it was angry at its own uselessness. Katie sat on the plastic bench, the one designed for no human comfort, and let her tears fall without trying to stop them. This was the part nobody trained you for. Not the combat. Not the medical crisis. Not even the blown cover. The part where you sat on a cold bench in the rain with everything you owned in a cardboard box and realized you'd sacrificed the wrong thing. Her son Derek would be wondering why his commander's care was being managed by a civilian nurse. He'd accept the answer his mother never gave, that his mother had spent 8 months making sure Marcus Webb got the kind of attention that protocol denied him. That she'd sat in this exact position, suspended, broken, removed from the mission, specifically so the investigation could accelerate without her name attached to it. That sometimes the bravest thing you could do was disappear. The rain blurred her vision. 6:43 p.m. The November cold bit at her exposed skin. She'd been sitting for 94 minutes when her secure phone vibrated against her ribs. Not her civilian phone. Not the one Cedar Creek had the number for. The classified encrypted line that didn't appear on any billing statement, that received exactly 3 calls a year. A voice she recognized from JSOC briefings. Captain Morrison. Stand by for authorization code sequence. Your operational cover is being accelerated for controlled revelation. Repeat, your identity will be compartmentalized disclosure within 72 hours. Pentagon is moving the investigation endpoint forward. Authorization granted to establish your presence in hospital administrator's briefing. You are directed to remain at current location and await extraction. ETA 40 minutes. The rain kept falling. Katie closed her eyes and felt the weight of the folded flag in her hand. Holloway had trusted her to carry this through combat. The Pentagon was trusting her to carry this through bureaucracy. And now, in the next 72 hours, everyone at Cedar Creek Medical would learn that the timid nurse they dismissed had been wearing the weight of the entire operation the whole time. She didn't cry anymore. She simply waited. A cardboard box. A dying plant. A flag. And the knowledge that sometimes the worst moment of your mission is exactly 40 minutes before everything changes. If you ever wondered what it meant to be underestimated, to carry secrets that could destroy you if revealed too early, then you understand why Katie Morrison sat in the rain and waited for the Pentagon to show up. If you've ever been in a position where telling the truth meant losing everything, then you understand why staying silent was the bravest choice she could make. Subscribe for more stories about the warriors you never see coming. Like this video if you'd have made the same call. And comment, what would you sacrifice to protect a mission you couldn't explain?